Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar on pulling strings to optimize your payments networks in the new normal. I'm Montana Townsend, and on behalf of the Western Bankers Association, I'd like to thank you for joining us today. Here's the plan. On your control panel, which is on the right-hand side of your screen, you'll find a Questions tab. If you have questions at any point during the presentation, please go to the Questions tab and simply type your questions into the chat box. We will answer your questions at the end of the presentation. If you'd like to download a copy of the handout our speaker has provided, please go to the Handouts tab on your control panel. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our speaker, Bob Koehler. Bob is Executive Vice President with SRM. Bob, I'd like to turn it over to you.
Great. Thank you so much. Thank you all for joining today. I appreciate your time out of the busy schedules that we all have now in the new normal, and know this will definitely be worth your all's time investment. So today we're going to be talking about optimizing your payments networks in the new normal. As you can expect, when I agreed to do this webinar, this presentation was going to take a different flavor. It was still going to be pulling the strings to optimize your payments networks, but now, what we've experienced over the last few months with COVID definitely has changed cardholder behavior and payments patterns. And so going to be talking today not only the history of what's been going on probably over the last decade, but also focusing on what's going on in the market right now and what's happening. That information is changing on a daily basis. As soon as as little as yesterday, I actually put in some additional slides from some additional information, and then actually have some handwritten notes this morning from even things that have come out on where customers are starting to shift now that the restrictions are easing in some of the places of the country. So with that, let's go ahead and get started. So as introduced, I'm Bob Koehler, been with SRM now for going on 20 years in the project management area, handling primarily the payments areas for financial institutions. A little bit about SRM, we've been in business since 1992. We are a performance-based firm helping banks helping them improve the performance of the vendor agreements through our proprietary benchmarks, data and analytics, and we've been able to assist our FI clients in increasing their revenue or decreasing their costs by about $3.6 billion to date. So as I stated a little earlier, we're going to go through a decade of the payments trends. We're not going to really focus on that. We definitely are going to be looking at what's currently happening right now inside the new normal, the COVID. Going to be talking a little bit about what may or may not stay the same, as we get restrictions lifted, as remedies are appearing on the forefront and what that may happen to do to the customer behavior. And then really what strings should you pull in order to optimize your revenue or reduce your cost structure on these agreements. So, the first one is show me the money. It's we're going to talk about, how to, again, reduce cost and increase the revenue, and starting out with the, pandemic and how you will adjust and how you need to adjust. So the first string that we're talking about here is if you would take a look at really pre-Durbin, what has gone on in the interchange for the exempt issuers. And keep in mind that the exempt issuers are the under $10 billion asset clients. So you can see that, the first one is that I'll talk about is Discover in the yellow line. That one's had a lot of fluctuation in the reports, and this is coming from the Federal Interchange Study Report that's produced every May to July, depending on the year. This one happens to be from this year. And so it's always a year behind. So their data is always going to be from 18 when they released it. They released it in July of 2019. So we should be seeing the 19 numbers probably in the next couple of months. But Discover has fluctuated a lot, but that is probably primarily because there is a small number of issuers on there. I believe that where they were in 18, which was at 1.44 basis points in interchange, is about where they actually are. You can see over on the graph on the right that Mastercard has actually remained flat. They had some up years, they had some down years, but they're mainly remaining flat. And Visa had a large uptick this year to a 1.43 basis points interchange. That's primarily due to them removing the study removing PAVD and moving that to its own data point. So if you can actually see down on the bottom right-hand corner, one small little dot at 0.96 basis points, and that's really Visa PAVD. And for those that aren't familiar with that, that stands for Visa PIN Authenticated Visa Debit. So PAVD, or PIN Authenticated Visa Debit. So back post-Durbin, right after Durbin was passed, Visa made it mandatory to be a part of the PAVD routing instructions, just like Mastercard made it part of the routing instructions to be into Maestro, which is their PIN network. Now, what separates PAVD, and the reason why it's on this slide in terms of signature interchange, is that when your cardholder dips their card into the PIN POS terminal, that merchant looks at the routing instructions and sees PAVD. So what happens is the transaction actually converts over to what was historically known as a signature or dual message transaction, but the transaction is now authenticated by the PIN number and not actually the signature. So that's why it's PAVD, PIN Authenticated Visa Debit. So it is definitely a lower interchange at 0.96 basis points. It should be higher than your PIN networks, but by converting over to what was, again, a signature transaction, you now have the Visa cost structure and your processor cost structure involved in that. So the cost is going to be a little bit higher. We're actually going to dive into PAVD a little bit more when we get into the PIN networks, because that's where it really interacts, and that's part of the second stream that we're going to talk to. So we will continue that in just a minute. And then really, you know, if you take a look at the slide, it can be a little deceiving too, because you see Visa at 1.43 basis points and Mastercard at 1.47. And so, you know, you take a look and it says, well, I should just move to Mastercard. I can make, you know, additional interchange income for nothing, you know, nothing more than switching over. Well, you've got to take a look at the next level down. And if you do, you will see that Mastercard has some higher fees than Visa does. So even though that Mastercard does enjoy an interchange advantage, you really have to pay really close attention to the fees, how your cardholders are transacting, and then what that means to you, and would there be a net benefit coming out of that if you decided to take a look. And conversely, if you decided to take a look at a Visa program, you know, by losing that but reducing your fees, would that even be a net income to you too? So the next slide is we're going to talk here about the second string, which has a lot of little strings attached to it anymore, post-Durbin. You know, pre-Durbin, it was great. You issued a debit card, you put some ATM networks on the back. If you issued it in '98, you put every PIN network known to man, because you had to have NICE in the Northeast, you had to have Pulse in the South. You know, you had to have Star for the Midwest region, you had to have Shazam for the middle states, and so forth and so on. So you did that and everything was great. You know, interchange went up every year from Visa and Mastercard. You made a little bit more money every year, and you controlled your routing table on the back of your cards. So if you put Star in position 1 and NICE in position 2 and Pulse in position 3, and that card went in that merchant, they had to route Star first. If they didn't participate in Star, then they had to go to Pulse, and so forth and so on. Now, post-Durbin, the number one, at least in my opinion, the number one adverse effect that happened from the Durbin standpoint, as you can tell from the previous slide, the signature interchange really wasn't affected that much. But what had adversely affected the exempt members are you'll have lost your routing table instructions. So now when your cardholder goes into a merchant that merchant gets able to stack those PIN networks in the order that they want. So they can, if NICE has given them the most preferential pricing, and that in turn means the less revenue to you all, then they're going to route everything NICE. Now, the top issuers in the country, the top merchants in the country and the top merchant processors in the country all have their own routing tables. So when you actually walk into Walmart, they're going to have their own routing table, and these are not static. A X network can come into Walmart and say, hey, we want 8 million transactions more, and we're going to cut you this deal. And then, say that's Pulse goes in and says they want 8 million transactions more. Then, NICE sees that they're losing Walmart transactions now. So they go into Walmart and they offer a deal to them. And then Pulse sees that they've now lost transactions for 2 months. So they go into Walmart and cut a deal. So it's referred to as what we call in the industry as race to position one. Every PIN network wants to be in position one in the major merchants and then the major merchant processors. So I used Walmart as an example, but it could have been easily Walgreens, Best Buy, name one of the top 20 merchants, or, for anybody underneath that does not have the capabilities to have their own processing. Chase credit card processing or Chase merchant processing has their own networks. First Data merchant processing has their own routing table. So you really have to pay attention to which networks now you're participating in, and making sure that to be fully optimized, you really only have what we call +1 network. As I said earlier, Mastercard mandates their Maestro product, which is their PAVD, which you can see down here. It's about number 6 or so here. And Visa actually has Interlink. Now, right now, Visa Interlink, you're not able to join if you're a Visa issuer, but you do have PAVD. And so that's where I said really PAVD plays into this. It can be, depending on the network you have, PAVD can really be a great moneymaker for you, depending on what's going on. So a lot of times we see Star down here with a PAVD is very good. Maestro can be a good one, but the way they interact and the way they win their merchants is how you need to really try to select your provider, depending on if you're a Mastercard Maestro shop or Visa Interlink PAVD shop. So it's not just, oh wow, I'm a Mastercard shop, so let me just get Interlink here at 35 cents. Just because they're offering the most interchange on an average ticket size is not going to make sure that coming forward in the future, you're going to be able to get that. So it's taking a look by your merchant category code to where your transactions are being processed in order to select which of the +1 networks, meaning not controlled by Visa or Mastercard, is going to be the best for your financial institution. Because you can see here on the exempt, and we'll just talk about the exempt today. The non-exempt is pretty flat over here, but you can see where the exempt, there is a 15 cents difference in the transaction interchange. And if you were to take your 80,000 transactions a month, or a million transactions a year, or whatever it is, multiply by 15 cents, that's going to be some great revenue for you all. But like I said, you really got to look at how your cardholders are participating in what merchants and where they're really using it. The other thing that's happened with the PIN networks later, and this is another one of the substrings, I'll call it for right now, between the two, is the Pinless debit, where you no longer have. It started out at the McDonald's, where McDonald's wanted a swipe and go at that time, less than $5. You don't have to input your PIN. You didn't have to sign for it. You swiped, you got your receipt, and then you got your food. Well, over time, as other players in the industry have changed their ways they're routing, the networks have actually gone up to a $50 per transaction limit on Pinless debit. Now, given that the average transaction size in the country, depending on where you are, is anywhere between $36 and $42 per transaction, that will pretty much cover all the transactions that happen on your card. So on the Pinless debit, they're going to have their own interchange rates. They're going to have their own cost structure. And that's really going to take that transaction away from the signature routing. So if you weren't participating in the pinless debit, therefore you would actually route those transactions over your Visa or Mastercard network at a much higher interchange. Again, study would need to be done to make sure that, just don't go out and cancel those, but do the studies to make sure that if you do decide to, you're making the sound business decision. One of the other substrings is also the dual message routing coming from these networks now. So with Visa and MasterCard mandating their PIN networks, the PIN network said, well, okay, then we're going to look and do the dual message or signature routing instructions. Every one of these networks on this screen, except for Maestro and Interlink, actually offers dual message routing. And again, that's a direct relation or direct degradation of your current Visa and MasterCard transactions. Not only does it hurt that, but now you have another route for merchants to take. And keep in mind, the only way, the way that a merchant is going to route that transaction is if it's cheaper for them, less revenue for you. So the more choices you give to the merchant, the worse you're going to be. Now with that, especially if you have a brand agreement with a Visa, MasterCard, or even a Discover, if you have one of those brand agreements with them, that's going to impact that revenue that you're anticipating off of that brand agreement. So it not only hurts you by giving the merchants more choices, it also possibly can hurt you given the brand agreements. Let's see, going to the next slide. There we are. So here's just a graphical representation of what the interchange rates have done pre-Durbin to post-Durbin. You can see that AFN, back in, I don't know what year that is, back in, I think it's 2012. This again is from the Fed study, reported, the merchants were reporting they were paying 1.41%. And I think that's an outlier. That really didn't happen. So you can actually see where, it's not a steady up or steady down for most of these networks. I mean, they are taking a look at what they're doing and how they're doing it to make sure that they win the routing the routing from the merchants. You do normally see some, little decline to a little uptick. Again, Interlink has truly gone up, and that's Visa's PIN network. Maestro is pretty much staying flat. Star has had a fairly decent decline over the time, so has Excel. And so that's really just dependent upon how they want to win those transactions. And again, as it was on the slide where I was talking about the Visa, MasterCard, Discover dual message interchange, again, you can't just go off of this slide and say, oh, well, let me get into Interlink, let me get into NICE or Pulse or whatever. You really need to take a look and see what's happening behind the scenes to make sure that you are truly going to optimize your revenue. So here, we've talked a little bit about, and this is the last slide that I think for a while that we'll talk about what's happened pre-pandemic also, but post-Durbin. And so you can really see where the non-prepaid debit cards have exploded in growth, even over credit cards. Checks is still declining. There's going to be, we'll talk about that in a minute, that's going to be a sharp decline. And then you have your other ones, your ACH debits, your prepaid debit cards, your ACH credit transfers, but those are nominal. But this slide really shows that debit is really the, at least in the United States, the customer's preferred method of payment. Of course, with credit cards, you do make a lot more income on those, but that has to be managed to make sure that you are, maintaining that profit. Just actually 5 minutes before we got on the phone here, I got another report that was published by Discover, and actually for credit cards in the month of March, if you look at the first week of March to the last week of March, they actually saw industry-wide a 40% drop-off in credit card applications. So I think that's, combined with, the tightening of credit, and then also people, stop using the credit because they're more concerned about cash and their finances right now and want to make sure they don't get into another situation like possibly they were when the Great Recession started. That people have, I think, learned some lessons from that and are starting to even take over, going back to debit even faster than we did. So if you take a look and see the rise of the debit cards, keeping in mind that if you take a look at your balance sheet, debit cards normally are either the first or second non-interest incomes on that line item, with the other one being your overdraft protection, depending on how you have that marketed and how you have that. So, especially for the exempt issuers that normally, if they do have a credit portfolio, it's normally a smaller credit portfolio. So even if you can move that needle, it's not going to make that much of an impact. But on debit, you have a large opportunity inside your financial institution to take advantage of some increased revenue. And again, here we see, just wanted to show you this one, even so pre-pandemic, where, the first left-hand of the slide is the remote and in-person card payment trends. And so you can actually see where the blue line is in-person and the green line is remote or just remote, where the number of transactions for both was steadily increasing for in-person and remote right here. But you can see the value that went on really dictated the customer behavior as making the larger purchases online. They're still shopping at the grocery store in person. They're still doing some of this stuff in person, but the value of the remote or e-commerce, really exploded up to even pre-pandemic meet in 2018. And so on the right-hand side now, we're going to talk about just the remote general purpose card payments. So your non-prepaid debit cards. You can see a small growth here in the reoccurring payments. You see the same, you see the same for value. And then again, you can see where e-commerce is just taking over, even pre-pandemic, which we're going to show you some explosion here in just a second on what's happened with the restrictions in place. So this now is a slide that was included in Visa's filing, actually as of June 1st. So as like I said earlier, these numbers are changing daily and really have to keep up with them. You can see where back here on March 8th, really before the pandemic hit and the restrictions started going into effect, both card present and card not present and card not present excluding travel, all pretty much about the same. I mean, there's a little bit of advantage here and there. And you can really see on the graph right here where it is, come March 22nd, 29th through April 5th, where the restrictions started going through on the in the different cities and different areas of the country, where customer behavior changed in a matter of 3 weeks. You can really see where card not present, excluding the travel, basically exploded to 40% increase over, I believe this is over from January 1st, so from not even March 8th. With that, what does that mean to you? It means digital strategy, wallets, wallets, wallets. Your card not present transactions, meaning the Amazons of the world, other websites, but that possibly participate in Apple Pay, Google Pay, Samsung Pay, where you're given that option. I know I've used that tremendously through this pandemic, where I'm shopping on a Best Buy for something, and it said, hey, do you want to input all your 16-digit numbers, or do you just want to pay via Apple Pay and do one click and scan my face and I'm done? It already pre-populates my address in there. It does all of that for me. It's just so convenient. And so really it is the making sure that your debit card is somewhere in that position. And it really has to be in position one. Customer behavior has been shown for the last 5 years. And as when I have this presentation in person, I actually ask people to raise their hand how many times somebody's gone in and changed their position one card in Amazon and Apple Pay and Google, Samsung Pay, and Uber and Lyft. That's no longer valid because those people, nobody's participating in Google, or I'm sorry, Lyft and Uber anymore. But nobody changes that card anymore, especially with the Visa and Mastercard automatic biller updaters, where even now when you have a card lost, stolen, and you get a new card, that is actually reported to a clearing agency, and that new card, they can match up the old card number with the new card number and immediately provision it back into the pays, into the Amazon wallet, into everywhere. So even now, you don't get a chance unless you start to market into those wallets, into those pays, to make sure that that debit card is in position one, or if you offer a credit card, put that credit card in position one too. This right here, where we are standing now for the card not present excluding travel from an e-commerce standpoint, that is actually where we thought we would be in about 5 years from now. And so the question is this really the watershed moment for e-commerce? Is this really where the United States is going to go? And are we going to continue this behavior in the future? I personally believe it's going to reduce a little bit. I think people do have an innate enjoyment for going shopping, seeing a product in person, being tactile, looking at it, seeing the quality of it. So I think we're going to reduce. Now, I will say there's a big asterisk on that. If we have a second wave in October, like they are starting to say, I think if we go through this again, people are going to be more hesitant to go into a store, touch a cardboard box where when we started, they said that wasn't unnecessary, but when we started, we had to wipe everything down before we brought it into our home from the grocery stores and everything. Do we find a vaccine for this? There were some reports out here that, we might be able to have a vaccine before the end of the year. So, I don't know if we're going to stay at this level where we are, but even if we recess a little bit, it's still going to be above where we were, and it's still going to be growing year over year. So you still really have to pay attention to it. Again, here's some very fresh data from the Q1 of this year on what's happened with the payments volume in the United States. Again, with credit having a really big decrease actually from the quarter to date of 25%. Your debit is starting to go up. We did have a pullback in April before we had a really great rise in May. And again, I think it's the lessons learned from the tightening of the Great Recession, and people went immediately to debit and started hoarding the cash. And with the credit, the lines are starting to be already reduced from some of the major issuers. The unemployment, so people are saying, I can't charge because I can't pay it off. And then what was really interesting to me also here was this process transactions report. That's really showing where, and so this is both e-commerce and in person, really showing where people now are starting to plan their purchases, making sure they only go to the grocery store once every 2 weeks. When they're ordering from an e-commerce website, and especially one that may charge shipping, getting all those products in one order. So even though the transactions have gone down tremendously, even over what debit is, the volume, the purchase volume from a debit standpoint is still there. And then the last section is really the cross-border, i.e. when your card holder goes off to a foreign country, or a foreign country card holder goes to a different country. This is really, you can see where travel has truly been impacted. Was actually surprised that this was not a greater reduction in cross-border volume. really interesting slide here showing, what has started to gone on and where people are actually spending their money and not spending their money. I think a lot of these are probably, um, you know, pretty evident. The home improvement, everybody stayed home and started doing home improvements, and the food and drugstore. Of course, travel, fuel, and entertainment just tanked. Restaurants, of course, declined. And so really, what does this slide tell you? And it's so, what are you doing, to make sure your debit card is in that position one again? So here, if I'm going out to the, home improvement, and actually the number one, up until this week, the number one product that was bought in the United States, and I believe in the world too, was dishwashers. They had a 3,000 some odd percent increase from the start of COVID to now for the appliance. And so, I mean, it shows that people are staying home, they're having to do this, they don't like their appliance. And so, with that, dishwashers were $500 and up dollars. And so how are you taking a look that, what is your debit limits? If I went into Home Depot, Lowe's, or another appliance store and wanted to buy that, device, could I even charge that on my debit card? Because I may have a $500, daily limit on my debit card, and I want to buy an $800 dishwasher. I'm concerned about my credit. I'm on unemployment right now, and it's okay because I'm getting the additional funding. But I wanted to buy this, now I can't, so now I've got to, maybe write a check. So taking a look at what your debit limits are, the food and drug stores. I'll going out to buy my groceries. I've got $100 and $250 worth of groceries because I'm buying a week at a time, feeding a family of four. I swipe my debit card. That's great. I get my groceries and go. There was a skimmer on there. So now, do I have fraud on there? And how am I handling from my financial institution standpoint? How are you handling the provisional credit? Bob has been a card holder with you, our account holder with you all for 20 years. He's always had a nice balance. He's never, has had a couple instances of fraud, but they were fraud, and it doesn't seem to be, having multiple frauds a year. And so, when I call in and say, hey, I just used my card at Kroger and I noticed 5 other charges now for $300 a piece, those were fraud. I did not make those. Provisional credit might be 100% to Bob. Well, Fred walks in and opens up an account, and 24 hours later he's claiming $2,000 in fraud. Well, provisional credit may be close to zero on that. So but it's really taking a look at that and not one size fits all on how you're doing provisional credit. I mentioned that it was dishwashers and shoes were the top two. Just actually saw a report where now they're expecting the outdoor activity purchases to start to really climb in this next 3 months, as the easing of the restrictions and travel and everything. People have been in their house for 2 to 3 months. They want to get outside now. They want to explore. They want they reconnected with family. Hopefully that stays, and they want to go out and enjoy some outdoor activities. So how do you market to what's coming up in the future? I'm sure some of you all offered some travel rewards on some cards, and maybe on the higher net wealth people had a travel benefit. Well, now with travel going away, do you do a 1 month to 2 month marketing campaign? Hey, if you go to Dick's Sports, Academy Sports, one of the sporting goods stores, we're going to give you a credit on your purchases to make these on the debit card. And you could have done that with the home improvement. I still think home improvement's going to continue. The food store, grocery stores, paying attention to how these trends are changing in order to continue to win those transactions and therefore make higher interchange for your all's financial institution. Again, I was talking about e-commerce. This is the explosion of growth in not only the United States, but the United Kingdom, Germany, and Australia on what has happened. Again, if you take a look at the United Kingdom, that actually has started to ease a little bit faster than we have because they were affected fast, or they had the infection rates first. You can see where it is starting to really take a dive as people go back into the stores. And so, but you can see where it's still, 60 some odd percent increase over where we were when we started. And that's kind of what I said earlier is what I'm expecting. But you can see really where the United States, during that same period that Visa shared, where it really had a huge impact on what the pure e-commerce, and this is by orders, went to. And again, right now where we stand is where we thought we would be in 2025, where all the experts had projected us to be here. And so I think we'll probably follow the United Kingdom, Australia. Germany is still fairly restricted, but has started seeing a little decrease. And so I think we're going to be here, but I think I believe we will probably be in this 50% range from where we started. So I know that was a lot of data. So how do you really look at this and look at your contracts and your networks and start to implement and negotiate with this data? You really got to level the playing field. And this is just a quote from one of our clients that, said, hey, I can always been a negotiator, found out that, I didn't have all the knowledge I could have, so I could have saved a little bit more money. So with that, here's really where the leverage resides right now. You as a financial institution will negotiate a contract normally every 3 to 5 years, whether that be core, processing, what have you, but those contracts usually come up every 3 to 5 years. And, the vendor is negotiating these on a weekly basis, negotiating dozens of these things. You have the people that you usually have assigned to this area are also focused on revenue. The vendor actually has dedicated people to not only negotiate this on their behalf. It's really not your salesperson negotiating it. There's people behind the scenes telling them what they can do and what they cannot do. From your standpoint, once you do pick a supplier for a different product, you will have some high transaction costs normally with changing out that supplier. They know that, so it limits the vendor, it limits their, responsiveness or what they know that you have to do. Then again, with the limited view of the market terms, because you're only negotiating one every 3 to 5 years, so you don't get an insight to it. Again, the vendor knows exactly what, not only they're doing, but they usually get a sense of what the other vendors in the market are also doing in order to keep up with that. So here we go, and this is, a takeaway for you all, the 7 tips to approach a negotiation. You really need to have a disciplined approach, and I'm going to go forward a couple slides. And really here, it's not only just negotiating this one contract, but it's taking a look at the pricing, taking a look at the process improvements, their capabilities, their functionalities. What is their roadmap going forward? Do they have what you're seeing in the market? Do they, utilizing the contactless chip, which has seen a big explosion growth here. People don't want to actually touch the machine anymore; they would just want to tap and pay. Look at their service and delivery functions, their flexibility to help you out in times that you need that. The vendor optimization. Are you utilizing that vendor for everything that they can do to assist you? That's not saying, with the FIS and the Fiserv and the Jack Henry and the core processors, putting everything in one basket, but of the ones provider that you're doing, are there additional services that complement what you need, what you want? So, the second one is, understand how and when. That sounds pretty, simple, how and when, and but it's, what is your notice date? Are you, keeping track? Do you have a system in place to make sure you're managing all your contracts? It can be as simple as, an Excel spreadsheet, and it can be as robust as some of the software providers out there offer. but make sure that you're maintaining that and you have a discipline to make sure that there is a keeper of the contracts in one central location, and that you're not only, doing the expiration dates, but also your notice dates. I can't tell you how many times we come in and we'll see a contract that just auto renew for a term of 5 years, and they didn't know it, or they weren't really paying attention to it. Nobody was managing it. So making sure that you understand how and when to start taking a look at these contracts. Take a look around. So what does that mean? Look at the alternative vendors. Go to their websites. Those are great selling tools for these companies. Find out what some of the alternative vendors are doing out there. Some of the digital banking providers are now offering, to be able to card swap inside their digital banking platform, to where when you log in, and it can have a pop-up window saying, hey, we don't see any Amazon transaction for you. Would you like to put our card in position 1 on your Amazon account? And so then another screen pops up and it says, log into your Amazon account, and it's just a little box, so you never leave your financial institution's website, and you put your credentials in, and then behind the scene it auto provisions that card in position 1. So take a look around. Don't just look at your current provider and understand what they're offering and what their roadmap is, but try to take a look around. You learn about the new features, processes. Do you go ahead and maybe solicit competitive proposals? That doesn't commit you from moving. There is no obligation to move, but that goes back to timing. So you got to make sure, when do to have those and make those solicitations. Negotiating the renewal terms, making sure you don't have auto renewals for like initial terms, that you're not going to be in. If you happen to make a mistake, you're not going to put yourself into another 5-year contract. That, it doesn't limit you. I've seen some contracts where you could only get notice of non-renewal 260 days before, and between 260 and 180 days before the contract expired. So you had like a 3-month window to actually notice them that you were going to, we need to make sure that that's not in there. Make sure that you see that 180-day notice. Take advantage of all the tools available to you. So, look at, possibly a third party, vendor management company. Make sure that you are taking a look at the pricing. Maybe someone else in your organization has had experience in this field. Talk to the other people in your organization, just making sure that you are taking advantage of all the tools at your disposal. Someone else may have had a situation where they were, in their previous company, where they, knew a lot about this area, but make sure that you're taking a look at all your available tools. If you're going through an M&A right now, that creates an opportunity for renegotiations. You're not only going to be canceling contracts, and so when you cancel those contracts, make sure you know what's going on. Make sure you know what you can reduce that structure to. But now you're going to be adding more volume to your current account or to your current supplier relationships. Quantifying that to them, bringing that to their attention. Making sure that they understand what it's going to go up to, and how you can negotiate that contract to be more favorable now with your increased volume. And then relationships are always key. You have to have the relationships. You got it. It's always got to be professional. You don't want to burn that bridge and then have that supplier still providing you. It's not just going to be a good situation. It's always, that's a great relationship is that usually leads to the best deal and the best in class service. Setting a standard for in your organization for making sure that that is kept at a professional and value relationship. And then knowing the adequate time that you have to contact these vendors, and that's where I'm going to get into here. So you can see on your screen now, you have your leverage on the left-hand side and the vendor leverage below. And so as you get closer to your auto renewal down here on the bottom right-hand side, your leverage is pretty much with the vendor. If you have 180 days notice, and at 180 days you decide, I want to take a look around at my debit card processing, you are behind the 8 ball and probably will not complete that process before it auto renews. So, and the vendor knows that, and they have the leverage because, they're not going to cut you off, but they know they could. On July 1, you're done with us and you told us you're not renewing. And so, have fun on July 2 trying to get your cards processed. Again, going up the slope a little bit, as you give more and more notice, renew a proposal within 6 months, you start to gain more of your leverage. Again, within 12 to 18 months, that's just getting renewal proposals. Competitive bid, all of a sudden, if you start doing some competitive bid situations, you really start to gain the leverage. Again, that runway we're talking about in the next step, really depends on the type of area. If you're looking at a core service, you're going to have to be 2 to 3 years out. You're looking at a PIN network change, you could probably be possibly even as close as 6 to 3 months out and really make that change happen. A processor, you're going to be looking at 18 months out to really do this and do it well. And then keeping in mind that all these vendors actually have different way to price everything and then marrying those up. So you'll need to make sure that you can produce an RFP, RFQ out in a way that's going to allow them to come back and give you the information in the format you need. And then the most leverage is, advisor-led competitive bid with adequate runway, with the advisor, having a large market knowledge in all these areas. And this is what we would expect for a 2 billion asset retail bank in card branding, which we talk about Visa, Mastercard, Discover. We would see about 10 million in cost savings or revenue increase. On your debit card processing, we would want to target probably 3 million in savings. In your PIN POS networks, we'd probably want to target about 1 million in contract savings and revenue. And you can range that up and down. If you're, a $1 billion asset, just cut those in half. So that's really where our targets would be for an organization that's 2 billion in assets. And here really is the key relationships to consider. Your card branding, EFT network, your credit card processing, your debit card processors, your PIN POS networks, your digital banking, your check providers, and your core. Even though checks is declining and it's even got a sharper decline, we still actually find some real savings in there. And then on to the right side, you can see where we've just listed probably the major providers for each one of those. A year ago, 2 years ago, this slide would have looked a lot different with all the, with all the acquisitions we've had. You no longer see First Data on there. You no longer see Vantiv, WorldPay, just a wide variety of companies that are now gone. So, that's also something to consider. I think we're probably done for at least a little while, given the pandemic with that. And so, in short, in conclusion, don't do this. Don't throw your money off the balcony. So, take a look, have a disciplined approach to what you're doing. Take a look at exactly what's going on. Do market research. What is that market telling you? How can you better affect what your debit card programs, your PIN POS networks, your vendor relationships can be in the future, and how can you manage those to optimize your revenue and decrease your cost as much. So with that, hopefully we have some questions, and I'm more than happy to answer anything that you all have.
Great. Thank you so very much for sharing your insights with us. At this time, I would like to give our attendees the opportunity to ask any questions that they might have. As a reminder, you can type those questions into the questions tab on the control panel. I'll give everyone just a minute or so here to type in those questions. And while we wait, Bob, are there any maybe common questions that typically come up on this topic?
Yeah, so a lot of times it's with the the PIN network side. that's the one that's really, got a lot of leverage or a lot of strength now and can really unravel fast. And it's really making sure that you're getting that information from your network provider. All the networks have this; they'll have it for you. They can break it down by merchant category codes, where your transactions are happening. So it's not like this black box of data that you have to try to figure out and where to go. Again, the vendor relationships are key. So go back and take get a hold of your PIN network providers or provider, and ask them for a lot of this information. They usually like Pulse dashboard is really great. You can usually log in sometimes to that and get all this data. So it can seem daunting, and it a lot of times is, but there are resources out there in your organization through your supplier base that can actually provide some of that stuff to you.
Great, thank you so much. So it looks like we don't have any questions at this time. However, if anyone does have any follow-up questions, please feel free to reach out to me or any other member of WBA, and we'd be happy to forward your questions on to Bob. I'd also like to inform you that we have another webinar tomorrow, June 4th at 9 a.m. Pacific Standard Time on developing call centers into a personal one-on-one touch point to support digital technology. Bob, thank you again for your presentation today, and thank you to everyone on the line. We will send a follow-up email with a link to the playback from this webinar, and we hope to see you at another WBA webinar soon. Bye-bye.